Hey guys, this is Mr. Albanez, and this is the homework video for Tuesday night, which is actually on the back. So we're going to go ahead and go to the back here. And for Tuesday night's homework, we're being asked to convert each fraction into a decimal, then estimate its place of each decimal on the number line, place the letter next to the fraction on the number line to represent it. So we're going to convert all of these fractions into decimals. And how do we convert a fraction into a decimal? Well, we're going to do some long division. Whenever we divide a fraction, the top number goes on the inside, bottom number goes on the outside. So this is 1 divided by 4. 4 goes into 1 0 times, so we're going to have 0 there. And so the steps that I'm doing right now is our dad, mom, sister, aunt, where D stands for divide. That was when I did 4 into 1, which goes 0 times. And then I multiply 4 times 0, which gives me 0. And then now I'm at the subtract. So 1 minus 0 is 1. And then A stands for add, but we're not adding 1 to anything. What we're adding is a decimal and a 0 to our remainder. So we're adding a 0 to that 1, that remainder of 1, to make it a 10. Now we're starting up from the top again. 4 goes into 10 2 times, divide. And then we're going to multiply 4 times 2, gives us 8. We're going to subtract 10 minus 8, gives us 2. And then we're going to add a 0. We don't have to add a decimal again because we only need one decimal in our answer. So we're going to add a 0, and now we're going to start from the top again. 4 goes into 25 times. 5 times 4 is 20. 20 minus 20 equals 0. And once we get to 0 or we find a pattern, that's where we stop. And so 1 over 4 is going to be 0 and 25 hundredths as a decimal. So 1 over 4 is 0 and 25 hundredths at a decimal. If that was a little too quick, go ahead and rewatch that first part. Now let's go ahead and second part that we have, B, is negative 1 over 4. So if 1 over 4 as a decimal, the positive 1 over 4 was as a decimal 0 and 25 hundredths, then negative 1 over 4 is going to convert into negative 0 and 25 hundredths. All right, we don't have to do the math again. We just are going to add a negative sign to that. Now we'll go ahead and do 2 over 5. I will go ahead and do that in this space here. 2 over 5, whenever we divide fractions, top number goes on the inside, bottom number on the outside. We're ready to do some long division, so we're going to do DMSA. Divide, 5 goes into 2 0 times. 5 times 0 is 0. 2 minus 0 is 2. Add a decimal and a 0. 5 goes into 24 times. We're starting from the top. We're going to multiply 5 times 4, which gives us 20. 20 minus 20 is 0. We got a 0 as a remainder, so we are done. So 2 over 5 as a decimal is going to equal 0 and 4 tenths. And so that means that negative 2 over 5 is going to equal negative 0 and 4 tenths, because it's the same thing, just negative. Okay, now we've got 1 and 3 over 4. How are we going to turn this one into a decimal? What are we going to do with this 1? That 1 is actually, in our answer, is going to stay as 1. So that is actually going to be behind a decimal. What we're looking to turn into a decimal is just a fraction, and that's going to, whatever this is as a decimal, is going to be over here past the decimal. It's going to be it's going to fill in the tenths, hundredths, thousandths place. So let's go ahead and see what 3 over 4 turns into as a decimal. 4 goes into 3 0 times. 3 minus 0 is 3. And then I'm going to add a decimal, add a 0. 4 goes into 37 times, which gives me 28. Remainder of 2. And then 4 goes into 25 times with a remainder of 0. And so 3 over 4 as a decimal is going to be 75 hundredths. Now I want to actually point something out too. So notice that we had 0 and 75 hundredths as our answer. I'm not going to put 1 decimal 0 and 75 hundredths, because that wouldn't make sense. That doesn't look like anything that we've been dealing with. Instead, I'm just going to take the number after the decimal. I'm going to get rid of everything else, I'm going to take the number after the decimal, the 75/100ths, and put it right here. And then this is negative 1 and 3 over 4. So this is just going to be negative 1 and 75/100ths. So now we've converted all of the fractions into decimals. We've got a mixed number that we converted into also a decimal, but we do have whole numbers in there. And now the next step is to place these numbers on this number line in order to represent it. So let's see. 0 and 25/100ths is represented by A. So we're going to put A somewhere on this number line. Here's 0, and then 25/100ths is positive, so I know it's going to be somewhere in this region. Now 25/100ths. The next number that I see here is 0 and 5/10ths, which is the same thing as 0 and 50/100ths. And I know that 0 and 25/100ths is going to be less than 0 and 50/100ths, so A is going to be somewhere right here in between 0 and 5/10ths. And it makes sense because, well, if you look at these like they were, if it was money, 25 cents is half of 50 cents. So it makes sense that we're going to place A somewhere there in the middle between 0 and 5/10ths. B is the same thing except opposite. It's a negative value. So that I'm going to place right here because it's going to be between 0 and then the negative 5/10ths. C, 0 and 4/10ths. Well, I know that 4/10ths is greater than 25/100ths, but is also less than the 5/10ths. So let me say that one more time. So 0 and 4/10ths is greater than 0 and 25/100ths, greater than A, but it's also less than 0 and 5/10ths, which is right here, 0 and 5/10ths on the number line. So that means C is going to be somewhere between A and 5/10ths. So I'm going to represent that on the number line by putting it somewhere in between the two. I'll put it right here. And then for a negative number, for D, there's negative 0 and 4/10ths. Well, that's also going to be somewhere between this negative 5/10ths and B, which represents negative 25/100ths. So that's going to be somewhere in between there. And the last two numbers I'm dealing with are E, 1 and 75/100ths. That's, I know, is going to be bigger than 1. It's going to be bigger than 1 and 5/10ths. So it's going to be somewhere in between 1 and 5/10ths and 2. So I'm going to put E over here. And I'm going to do the same thing for F. It's going to be somewhere in between negative 1 and 5/10ths and negative 2. So I'm going to put F in here. So now I've placed all my letters where they need to go. I've turned all my fractions into decimals. And then if I read this from left to right, I would be reading them from least to greatest. And so that completes my homework for tonight.